76% of Latinos at work hide parts of their identities. And it's all about this idea of executive presence, or even like what a quote unquote professional is supposed to look and be like. But if you look at the definition of professionalism, it's just the skill or competence needed to do a job.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Yanire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Pabel Martinez, a former tech executive whose mission is to redefine professionalism by scaling the representation he wished he had earlier in his career. And he is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Pabel Martinez, welcome to LatinX Can.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the podcast and excited to learn more about you. I only know a little bit about you, but I already admire you quite a bit, so I'm excited.
Oh, thank you.
So let's start by talking a little bit about your story and where your story begins.
Yeah, for sure. So born and raised in New York City to a Dominican mother and father. And when I say New York City, it's interesting because I grew up on the Upper West Side, which is like one of the wealthiest zip codes in America. Yet I grew up in public housing. So it was this interesting dynamic of being surrounded by people with money, but in my building, I was surrounded by poverty. So it was a bunch of low income families, typically of color, obviously. So there was a big Latino population, big Black population. But it's interesting because you walk down the street and it's where like Macaulay Culkin lived, the dude from Home Alone.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And so what was it like growing up in New York City and, to Dominican parents? Like, what was the Latino influence in your household, or what was it like?
I grew up speaking Spanish. So that was my first language. My mom and dad weren't necessarily together. So my father was around sort of financially, but not necessarily physically. Like I never lived with him. I grew up with my mother and then my grandparents, right? Her parents. And my mom was the one that was working all the time. So I was really raised by my grandparents, and my grandparents didn't know English to this day. Abuela still doesn't speak English, but she was able to survive in America, but she taught me a bunch of things about the culture. One of those being Spanish. So that was my first language. I didn't learn English until I went into school, but also it was this appreciation for the culture and all that it brings with it. So one of the things that she did with me as well is that every year, twice a year, probably until I was in like high school or maybe even like a little bit before college, I would go to the Dominican Republic for Christmas and then in the summertime. And I would get to know the culture, the food, my family, the music, but also this sense of belonging, and also this sense of like, as living on the Upper West Side, surrounded by poverty in my building, and then looking up to the people that live down the street from me, it was way different when I went to Dominican Republic, because even though I was in poverty in the US, I was rich compared to the people in Dominican Republic. So it was also this sense of gratitude for what I grew up with as well. Although it didn't seem like much, is a lot more to a lot of people in other places.
Yeah, I think that really helps to put things in perspective, right? I was just thinking about something you said, that, going back to the Dominican Republic and going there for Christmas. I can only imagine that was like one of the best times to go, because having moved away from Venezuela, the one thing that I missed all the time was just Christmas time, because Christmas here doesn't compare at all. What was your experience like?
Yo, so true. It's funny, too, because, we would always bring 2 suitcases just packed full of things. And one suitcase was essentially for me, but the other suitcase was just full of gifts for people, because you come through on the block and it was like my family was Santa Claus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We were just coming through with so many things just to give out to people. But it was also, there's so many celebrations even around Christmas that I think were really fun to celebrate, like Noche Buena, right? Like we celebrate the day before Christmas versus here. And that's like another Thanksgiving pretty much over there. In addition, there's so many things that I would not do here as a kid, but over there was like cool, like fireworks. I used to like
Yeah.
fireworks all the time over there. It was affordable, it was fun, but it was, I mean, obviously dangerous too, but it was kind of just commonly accepted for kids to do it. Here, like, not really. It's looked down upon,
Yeah.
and mostly like adults do it. I get it for safety reasons, but I was able to have a little bit of different fun over there.
Yeah. Do they also do año viejos in the Dominican Republic? Those are like these stuffed cloth things that we make. You put it in there, you stuff it in with fireworks, and it's like just like a
Oh.
scarecrow, maybe like that. And then you stuff it in with fireworks, and then we would put it in the street, by houses and things like that. And you would collect money for the año viejo until that would be the money that you actually used to pay for the fireworks that you already stuffed it with. And then on New Year's Eve at midnight, it would go off. And then so everybody just lights their año viejos on fire. And it's just this crazy explosion of fireworks.
No, I've never done that. Now you're gonna make me look up videos later on Año Viejo.
Yeah, yeah, you should look it up. I mean, it's definitely not the safest thing, but it was fun, you know?
Yeah.
And how about growing up? I mean, if you went to college at Northeastern University, right? And
Yeah.
coming from a background that was pretty humble, how do you fund your way through college? And was it an influence from your family to really emphasize that college was the pathway to follow?
Yeah, education was very important. Although I don't think many people, well, I don't think anyone in my family got to the level of institution that I was able to go to, like a school like Northeastern. My aunt went to college. She even she even went to grad school. She's a social worker. My mom, I think, got her associate. So there's a couple people that got like advanced level degrees from institutions, but Northeastern was a really good school. And it's been climbing the rankings as of late. And I got in, I mean, honestly, it's not to say that I wasn't smart, I wasn't a good student, but I really wasn't. Like, I wasn't getting A's in high school. I wasn't taking any AP classes. I was like a B student in high school, so I was decent. I got in probably because of affirmative action. And I have no shame in admitting that. But I got in and I was able to graduate. But I think going back to affirmative action, I was part of this scholarship program because I was low income, I qualified for, and because of my high school grades, I showed potential to do well, right? So it's
Right.
not looking at people that were exceptional students in high school, but really showing low income students that showed potential for success. And I think that really summarized me. But it was a full ride. So I didn't have to pay for anything tuition wise. They even covered a few additional costs, but it was a full ride tuition wise. So I was
Yeah.
very fortunate from that standpoint.
Yeah. And I think what you say, talking a little bit about affirmative action, it's like, I don't know. I don't think I understand the program or the intentions well enough, but what I can understand is it's a program or an initiative to give people opportunities that, thinking about how schools are funded in the United States, where the funding comes from taxes, right? So there's a huge education inequality, and that's mostly for Black and Latino kids. Then how can you expect, if that's the issue, how can you expect children who goes to these schools that are underfunded to perform at the same level, right? That just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many studies, even from like a standardized testing standpoint, there's such a strong correlation between people that do well in the SATs and higher household incomes, right? Because they can afford the preparations, they can afford the tutors and all of those things that even happen outside of school. So like even the funding in school, but there's also the funding just outside of school through disposable income. So yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of the program, obviously, because it helped me get into school, but I think it does help close the gap of opportunity for so many people. And, it's interesting too, because like I was the best student, but I think even with that, like there are so many people that were better students than me, but haven't done as well or as much as I've done in my professional career, right? So like I don't even think like there's a strong indication between how well someone is a student versus how well they're going to do in business or their career, right?
Absolutely.
So and that's actually one of the reasons I went to Northeastern. Like one of the things that attracted me was they have a co-op program where essentially 6 months throughout the year you're working, and then the next 6 months you go back to school, and then you go back to work, and then you go back to school, right? So I'm way better at working. Like I'm an experiential learner. I need to do things in order to learn. Like the idea of traditional schooling and me just like reading a textbook, that reading comprehension model, like I'm not good at. Till this day, like I don't even read for fun.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to ask, you grew up, you mentioned in the Upper West Side, but mostly around Black and Latino or Latinx people. And then the outer bubble was probably white, right? Because it's predominantly rich people in the Upper West Side. Then you go to Northeastern University, and then you mentioned to me that was one of the first spaces that you inhabited that was white dominant. What was that experience like for you going there and experiencing college?
Yeah, it was intimidating because it was the first time actually in school or I was in a class where I was surrounded by people that didn't look like me, that didn't have the same shared experiences as me, right? In high school, in middle school, and all of those early academic experiences, I was always surrounded by people that looked like me. And I was never, I wouldn't say I was shy, but I also wasn't eager to raise my hand ever. Now in college, I definitely wasn't eager to raise my hand. So if I was ever shy before, I'm definitely shy now. And, there was a sense of community, though, early on in school because of my scholarship program, though. So the people that were in my scholarship program were mostly Black and Hispanic, right? So from an instant, it kind of felt like home in the sense of the Upper West Side is full of mostly white people. My school was full of mostly white people. But in my building, if I could create the analogy of my building being my scholarship program, that's kind of like what it felt like. They became my community, and they became the people that made being at the school a lot more fun, enjoyable. And I don't think I could have done it without them.
Yeah. I think I ask you this because I was thinking about the experience in general, but the majority of my friends here, my close friends, are international students or were international students at some point, like I was, right? I came here to study in college and I was an international student. And I was also part of the swimming and diving team at the University of Florida, and the entire team was white. And I just couldn't relate to the teammates. Like I just couldn't, I don't know what it was. I spent 9 months in the team, and I was like, I wasn't on an athletic scholarship. So I was like, I'm going to quit this. I'm going to go. But on the other hand, the scholarship I had was a scholarship for international students. And I was friends with all the international students because they understood me and I understood them, So at that point, I thought that I was weird, that I was just the one person who couldn't quite relate to the Americans, because at the time I didn't know them as white. I didn't refer to people as white. I just probably refer them as gringos, and I was like, oh, I just don't really click with gringos that much. But my experience has always been from the side of, oh, I'm the outsider. I am an international student and I am a guest in this country. And so if I feel like I don't fit, it's probably because it makes sense. I don't fit. I don't belong here, But then I started hanging out with people who are Black and grew up here. And they started mentioning similar experiences in that they don't feel comfortable in these spaces either. And so that argument of, you're not from here doesn't apply anymore. And so that really made me think a lot more about the situation.
Yeah, that's so relatable. I'm glad that you found that community. You were able to do that self-reflection during that experience.
Yeah. Well, it was like 10 years later, but I still managed to find my friends. Then growing up, I guess the goal was to work in the financial sector, being in New York City. You study economics. You grew up thinking that you're going to start working in the financial sector. And then when you start your career, you actually go into tech. So what was that transition like, thinking of finance versus tech? And what was it like for you to work in the tech industry?
The only reason I ever wanted to study finance was because that's the only career that I thought you could make money in. And my only goal in life at the time was to make money. And I didn't know what money was. I just knew it had to be more than what I grew up with, because I didn't want to continue living in the projects. And I also didn't want to live life not being able to spoil my mom and grandparents and family the way that I wanted them to live. I just experienced so much. And, I know that people live worse, but I really wanted financial independence for myself and my family. And I thought that investment banking and finance in general was the only way. Yeah. But I ended up not being able to get into business school. I ended up not actually interning at a finance company. Most of my internships happened to be in tech. But when I started working in tech, I realized, I was like, wow. Although I've never worked in investment banking, I know that this organizational culture is way different than anything my friends ever talk about in finance. Like, people were wearing whatever they wanted. They were drinking beers in the office. They were playing ping pong. They were just having a good time while still doing work. And I was like, this is the type of company that I want to be a part of. So every internship or job I've had after that has always been within tech, because I was like, this at least seems a little bit more comfortable of an environment for me to be myself compared to finance.
Yeah. And it's always cool to see like the videos of, the headquarters at Facebook or Google where they have, the sleeping pods or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could just like go into one of those and fall asleep for 15 minutes.
Yeah, I've had a job where they've had them, and I've taken a nap.
I always have a nap at my desk, but that was in grad school. Probably I would have got fired if I did it at work, but hey.
Yeah. I've worked at companies that had a nap pod, and there used to be like a sign-up sheet, and that shit used to be so full. It's really cool.
And so you also worked, you make your ways in like, was it about 10 years that you had been working in tech, right? You made your way to Facebook, and then up until like the most recent place that you worked was TikTok as well, right? And you've mentioned they're pretty good places to work. But what was your experience as a Latino in these organizations?
I'd say overall, I had positive experiences. I don't want to go back to school. Like, I never want to get my MBA. I always say that, my experiences at Facebook and TikTok, companies like that, they taught me so much about business, because, I've been in tech for a while before I got to Facebook, but the level of client interactions that you get working at one of those companies, you can't compare it to the companies I was working at before. For example, I would often meet with clients who were marketing teams at these like really big companies, right? But previously to Facebook, the people that I was working with was like marketing directors, managers, assistants, whatever. When I got to Facebook, I was meeting with the chief marketing officer. I was meeting with the CEOs of companies, right? So it just elevated my experience, my knowledge, my credibility, all of those things instantly when I started talking to those people. Like, I really learned a lot about business. That said, it was also an opportunity for me to see how many people don't look like me, not only at the companies that I work for, but also the clients that I'm helping grow their own business. So it was the first time where I started to have to code switch and assimilate beyond my own job. I started assimilating and code switching with my clients. So because we used to take them out to dinners and entertainment events and all of those things. So the level of assimilation, I think, also elevated at the same time.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about code switching since you bring it up, and I'll tell you why. And this goes back to being an international student for the most part, right? Like, I mean, now I am a U.S. citizen, but I still very much feel like I'm a foreign in the U.S. Now I just have papers and they can't deport me. It's a big difference, but I didn't really know what code switching was until I started working. And I didn't become aware of it until my Black colleague pointed it out and said, well, this is what we need to do in order to sort of like have an easier time working here. So imagine your audience is pretty much like me and people who don't really understand, even though we have to do it anyway, we just don't realize that we're doing it, right? Can you talk a little bit about what code switching is and, maybe like the toll it takes on people?
Well, it's interesting because there's data that's out there that says, and this is published by the Center of Talent Innovation, it says that 76% of Latinos at work hide parts of their identities. And it's all about this idea of executive presence, or even like what a quote unquote professional is supposed to look and be like. But if you look at the definition of professionalism, it's just the skill or competence needed to do a job, right? Yep. So we've been trained by society, by our families, by our friends, that we have to put a certain persona together when we show up to work, whether that be how we dress, how we do our hair, et cetera. But it's not true. It's all BS. It's all based on our bias. That said, when we go into work, you look around and it's mostly people that don't look like you, especially when you look at the executive level, right? So what I did, I was like, all right, well, if I want to feel relatable, if I want to build a relationship with the people that are in power, I'm going to do my best for them to see me as one of them. Right. And they're not going to feel related to me if I talk about Bad Bunny and Mark Anthony. Let me talk about Bruce Springsteen, and let me talk about Taylor Swift and all of these kind of things. Right. So it was code switching is just like the intentional act of hiding parts of your identity in an effort to fit in and feel relatable to other people. That's kind of what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. When I realized that I needed to start changing things a little bit was when I just came in, I was in a chemist role, a scientist role, and I did a PhD. I'm very much aware of that I'm good at science, like I already went through this thing, and you hired me because of that. But you also hired me because I was diverse and because I would bring a different point of view. And you even told me when you hired me that you wanted me to challenge things and to challenge the status quo. And so I started working, and for the first 3 or 4 months, it was okay. And then I started getting feedback that I was maybe too close-minded or things like that. And one very specific example of how I realized that I needed to start changing things is like when I had questions, I would ask why, like really just why, right? And then I would see eventually somebody told me, it's like, well, why don't you say, can you help me understand how you arrived at that decision? And I was like, what? It's the same freaking question, It's a lot more inefficient to ask it the other way, And I'm not being rude. I'm not yelling at you or anything like that. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, it's often like even the way that we speak or present ourselves gets misinterpreted. So even parts of those things, right? Like we quote unquote tone ourselves down because we're being labeled as like difficult to work with or aggressive in our tone, right? So we ask it in different ways. It's fascinating how many ways we have to change ourselves to be more accepted in corporate spaces. And I love the fact that you mentioned that because it goes beyond just like how we dress, right? It goes beyond just what we wear. I think that's the easy thing that people typically lean into when they think about code switching, but it goes far beyond that.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I dress the part, whatever the career center said that I should wear, I would wear it, I would wear the suit. I started wearing, all black or blue dresses because that's what they said was acceptable. But I like my orange dress, I still want to wear my orange dress. But yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't so much as like how I looked because like my hair is straight by nature. I am not that dark. So I bear that privilege, right, over other people who have a darker skin tone than me. But I was very direct, and I didn't know that I couldn't do that. And so that's where I just noticed these things, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, I'm not being rude. It's just you don't like the way that I'm saying things.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because I think that's very cultural as well. Like mi abuela, as soon as I see her, it's not like, yo, how are you? Like, she doesn't beat around the bush, as people say, or like, she gets right to it. She's like, pero tú estás gordo. Tú no estás comiendo, que tú estás comiendo, right? It's not like, oh, how are you? You know, how's life been? She gets right to the point, right? And that's just who we are. We're like very direct. But I think it's interesting though, because we are not the majority in many of these corporate spaces, we often hide who we are, code switch, assimilate to fit into the majority, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But white people are not assimilating to us because they don't have to. Why would they assimilate to the minority? You know what I mean? So the reason why people of color do it and minorities do it is because we are trying to assimilate to the majority, because that's who has the power. Not only the majority in like our position, but the majority from an executive standpoint as well.
Yeah. From my perspective, for example, I would be okay if you just told me, we are just here and we don't care about diversity and inclusion. This is the culture it is. And if you want to work here, this is it, But don't come and sell me this diverse working place where you're looking to have inclusion and you're at the top 50 companies in the US in the D&I index, and then tell me that you're not going to have other people adapt to me, right? Because if I try to adapt and you're not adapting to me, then it's not inclusion, it's assimilation. And those are two very different things.
Exactly. I agree. Yeah. Feels like political campaigns. Like they're preaching a lot of stuff, but when you get there, it's not really the case.
Yeah, and that's so disappointing. But anyway, hopefully we can change some things on our side. But, I was listening to your podcast, and we'll talk about your podcast in a little bit. But one of the stories that you were telling in your podcast was an instance where you had just finished a client meeting with your team, and somebody was I think all of you got into a car and you had a debrief on what the interaction was. And that turned into a situation where you were asked to apologize to your colleagues for what had happened. Can you share the story with us?
Yeah, I could do that really quickly. So we were in a client meeting and we left the client meeting and we were debriefing. We essentially called it Uber XL, got in the car, and we were just talking about the meeting. And I mentioned that I disagreed with the strategy that somebody proposed. And someone asked me why, started off as a simple conversation. I said, I disagree because of these reasons, and this is what I would do instead. And the person said, well, it's really important that we agree with each other. And I'm like, well, why? Like, it's okay to disagree. Like, in fact, I'm happy moving forward with your suggestion as long as the team agrees with it. But at the same time, I just want to let you all know that this is how I feel about it. Right. So it just started off as an interesting conversation. There was some back and forth. Eventually, one person in the car, it was about like 6 people in total, myself included. Eventually, someone raised their voice and I raised my voice in return. And there was a bit of, I would say, a loud discussion. And eventually, I was the person that was labeled aggressive. I was the person that was told to apologize. And I think that was really unfortunate because anyone that I've interacted with would not describe me as aggressive, especially from a tone standpoint. But I had a really interesting conversation with my therapist about it around, she asked me were you being aggressive? And I said, yeah, you know what? Maybe I was. And she said, well, that's okay. Have you ever felt unheard by your teammates? And I was like, wow, yes, all the time. Like I always say something. I feel like they don't listen. And then she's like, oh, that makes sense. They say that people that use a louder tone are often using the voice of the unheard. Like maybe you were using a louder tone because you felt like that was the last resort for them to finally listen to you. Right. And I feel like so often people of color, minorities, we get labeled these things as too much, difficult to work with, aggressive, before we're able to build some of those really fundamental, quote unquote, soft skills, like being able to communicate our emotions. So, eventually my company Plural will, right now it's a media company, eventually will transition into maybe into like the ed tech world, where we were able to teach minorities that are looking to advance their career some of these skills that I think are so necessary. Besides, because I don't think it's enough to just know Excel and PowerPoint and all these skills, or how to code. Like, I think it's really important to have these quote unquote people skills or soft skills to be able to advance your career. Like, that's stuff that they don't teach you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, I mean, two things about that. It's like as you advance in your career, or as one advances in one's career, the Excel skills sort of like become less important, right? Because you're dealing more with people and taking decisions and directing teams rather than actually doing the work. Right. So and then, absolutely. At that point, it's like, well, what are you going to rely on if you don't know everything else,
Exactly.
And then the other thing that you said is like, you raised your voice and you were labeled aggressive. It's also, I think I would say it's also a little bit cultural of having a louder tone in general. And just speaking louder, you know what I mean? It's like, you know how many times people have told me, "Oh, don't yell." I was like, I'm not yelling. Like, this is my standard tone. I know it's higher than what you're used to, but this is standard.
I tell my mom all the time, I was like, "Mom, I'm right next to you, Mom."
I know. But it's like, I like when people come to our house, it's like crazy. It's super, super loud all the time. And even when we go to restaurants, I can tell, like, we start having a good time and it's like the entire restaurant is looking at us. They're like, "What are you guys doing?" It's like, we're just having fun. This is how we do it.
Maybe we're all just really unheard growing up. It keeps passing down,
I think you just touched on a lot of things. Some generational traumas right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, thank you, by the way, for sharing your experience. I think I told you earlier, you have accessed a level of vulnerability that I haven't accessed yet. And I'm very proud of you for some reason. Just looking at you from the other side of the screen to just, be open about it and tell these stories, because these stories that are happening, it's just, we're not talking about them.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And, the more that I share these stories, the more I'm empowered to continue, because people's messages and DMs, them telling me like, wow, like that helped me work through whatever I'm working through. And it's giving me the confidence to move forward and start speaking up for myself or even get the help that I deserve. Right. Because, a part of the story that often gets overlooked is like, I didn't come to that realization by myself. Like, I went out and got help. So therapy has been huge in my life, personally and professionally as well.
Yeah. I think it's a very important thing to mention, that we should look for help when we need it.
Agreed.
The other thing that you did, and this is perhaps how I became aware of you and your presence online, is that you went on LinkedIn and you decided to sort of completely share your salary when you were still working at TikTok, right? And you just went in there and you talked about your base salary, you talked about your bonus, and I think even your sign-on bonus as well when you got into the company. And I am a person who advocates for salary transparency, but I haven't really found a crowd that is reciprocal, but you sort of like went out there and then just shared it with the world. And like, I wonder like what motivated you to just put it out there for the whole world to see?
There's so many things about traditional corporate spaces. There's so many social norms that just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I remember getting a job or getting many jobs and getting the offer, and then someone saying, "Oh, don't be sure not to share that with anyone," right? Like, probably someone in HR. I remember people saying that. And I'm just like, "Oh yeah, cool. Like, I'm not going to tell anybody." But then I was like, wait, why? Like, why can't we share things, right? And then I remember going into salary negotiations and referencing Glassdoor data, right? Because that's how we've been taught to go out and research data to then advocate for ourselves and say why we deserve more money, right? But then I legit had recruiters tell me like, "Oh, take that information with a grain of salt because that stuff is self-submitted," right? So because it's self-submitted and it's anonymous, I shouldn't believe it, or they don't believe it. So then how else do we get this information? So I was like, if I want to be the change that I wish I had when I was younger, or the representation, like next time I go into a salary negotiation, I want to be able to reference like stories and experiences that people aren't being anonymous about it. Because I can point to be like, oh no, your employee at your company is getting paid this amount, and you can't tell me otherwise because I have the receipts for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if someone was getting interviewed for my position, or a position that is opening on my team, they can know going into those negotiations how much I'm getting paid. Because the people that get lowballed the most are people that look like us, which is unfortunate. And mostly women too.
Absolutely. And like, do you have a group of friends or colleagues that are open about salary transparency? Because what I found in my experience is that people still think that it's taboo to talk about money, right? And they haven't quite understood that if you don't, at least here in the States, if you don't ask for more money, you're not going to get it. Nobody's going to volunteer more money to you just because they're kind. And so like, I feel like that really hurts us, but I haven't found a way to like convince my colleagues and friends to talk about it.
It's a really small group of friends that I would talk about it. And I'm talking about a handful. Like I can count on one hand how many friends I can talk openly about money with. I agree. It's a very uncomfortable situation for most people. I think it's because of ego, though, right? Because we never want to be the person that is making the least amount of money. And we also don't want to be embarrassed to find out that we are, for whatever reason, even on the same team, like someone screwed us over, I think that people are open to sharing it if they're getting paid the most on the team, right? Like that's an easy situation to say, right? But they don't want to be embarrassed to find out that they're not, right? And then what do you do there? What do? Do you go to HR and say like, hey, I'm going to quit if y'all don't give me a raise? What if they don't give you a raise? Are you really going to quit? Right? Because there's that next step around like you stepping up for yourself and taking action. But in most cases, HR is going to be like, yo, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. Then what are you going to do? Are you going to leave? And if you don't leave, what is that ego hit going to feel like if you just stay there and know you continue to be underpaid?
Yeah. It would force people to at least try to do something, and doing nothing is doing something, right? It's accepting that that's just the situation. The way I look at it, though, it's about reaching a decision, right? If everything else about the job, it's okay with you and you like it, and then the money is not that important, then that's okay. But at least if you want to go and get more money, you can go and try and get it for yourself. But if you don't have that information, like you said, the negotiation doesn't go very well because you don't really have data to advocate for yourself.
Agreed. Yeah. And even if you don't use that for the specific job that you have now, at least or you have an understanding of what the industry is paying other people.
Yeah.
For your future job.
Exactly. I mean, I was a person who just like would get maybe some recruiters on LinkedIn saying, oh, hey, I have a position. Are you interested? And I'd be like, no, I'm not looking for a new position. But in the last year or year and a half, I was like, yes, I'll talk to you. And I'm going to ask you how much you're going to pay for that role. Because that way I can build my own database. I'm not looking for a job right now, but at least I have the information. So when I am looking for a job, I know what I can target.
Exactly.
And another thing that you're doing well now, you mentioned Plural, and I don't know how Plural was born, but you also have a podcast, I think is part of your brand. And I think if I'm paraphrasing it correctly, your goal with the podcast is to redefine what professionalism is or means. So tell us a little bit more about your podcast and what you aim to achieve.
For sure. And I appreciate you highlighting that. So I mean, again, back to my corporate experience at all these places, there weren't that many people that looked like me. But the people that did look like me, they were faking it just as much as I was. They were also assimilating. They were also code switching. And I didn't see that much representation of people that looked like me that were being their most authentic self and doing well at work, right? Their most authentic self came after work when they, quote unquote, clocked out. You know what I mean? So what I wanted to do with this brand and the podcast, which is part of the brand, is to showcase representation that I wish I had when I was younger, so that I knew that it was okay to be myself, and being yourself is what can get you promoted. You know what I mean? So on the podcast, every episode, we have a new guest explore the conflict that they have faced between professionalism and authenticity. And if you think about a lot of these experiences, they often go untold because we don't want to tell someone that we're struggling at work, right? Like, who are we to tell our family and friends after they've been struggling for so long that we finally got this good paying job? And what are we complaining about that we can't be ourselves at work? Mijo, cállate, you know what I mean? Like, that's what my family would say, right? And also, they often get told anonymously, if you think about these experiences, because we're scared for our managers to know that they've been racist towards us, or like there have been microaggressions. Like, these are real experiences that we often don't talk about because we're scared of the retaliation. So it's one of the first times, or one of the first platforms that have been built where people are openly putting a face and a name to some of these experiences and stories. And I think that's why it's been able to grow so much.
And I mean, when you say it's a space for people to talk about the dilemma of, being a quote unquote professional and also showing up as their authentic selves, what do you mean by authentic self? Because I heard that phrase in so many ways in all of these corporate roles. And I was like, but I am my authentic self, and you're criticizing me for being who I am,
That's a great question. In fact, that's the first question that I ask every single guest. I start off the podcast with, what does the word authenticity mean to you? Because I agree. I think every company says, bring your most authentic self to work. But I don't think we often sit back and actually think about what it means. And what I found out in the research is that everyone has their own definition for it. So it means something very different and specific to you versus me versus everyone else. And what I found is that it typically is related to an insecurity that you have. And that typically also aligns with what you hide about yourself. Like, your definition of authenticity is tied to the insecurity that you hide at work. So, I mean, for me, authenticity means, or at least is, when I don't feel the need to censor myself, right? And that censoring is kind of like what I've been hiding for so long. Whenever someone asks me, I quickly think in my brain, like, what is the censored version of what I really did, right? And that's kind of like what I communicate to people. So my authentic self is when I don't feel the need to censor my response. And it's not necessarily in my tone or how I say it. It's literally just like what I say. So, if someone asked me like what I did on the weekend, typically I would censor my answer and I would come up with a lie instead of being like, no, you know what? I was dancing salsa this weekend, and that's what I was doing. I was smoking hookah, popping bottles. But for me, that I censored that because I knew that wasn't relatable. In reality, that is what I did, though. So that's what authenticity is to me.
I think that's a great discovery, or take out from the data, is that everybody has its own definition. And so for companies to go out there, say, show up as your authentic self, like that's not enough, right? What does that even mean? And are you ready for people to show up as their authentic selves, right?
100%. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, it's not up to workplaces. I think this is where most businesses or companies mess up. They try to define what authenticity is for their employees instead of letting their employees decide what authenticity means to them, right? Like, companies need to embrace and in many ways give like more control to their employees to define what authenticity looks like to their employees, right? And let them bring that to wherever they work, because that's how they're going to do their best work. I think often we spend so much time assimilating that it takes away from us just doing what we were hired to do.
Yeah, it takes a lot of brain power, right? To just think back at that example, like when I learned that people didn't take in really well, that I was just going to ask why, they'll be like, oh, this girl is rude. And I start to then say, oh, help me understand why or how you arrived at this decision. It's like, look at how many more words that is, And then every time my urge is just to say why, and then I have to bite my tongue, breathe, and then say, oh, help me understand how you arrive at this decision. It's like so much waste of energy.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm venting a little bit because it's like one of the things that bothered me the most about just learning that people were criticizing me for that.
Yeah. But I think going back to like that therapy session that I had around like, how do we even communicate our emotions? I think emotions is a universal language, like being able to communicate that, even you saying, I'm confused. Why? Like, that's a feeling, that's an emotion that people can understand and say, oh, you're confused. I don't want you to feel confused. Like, how can I fix your confusion? Right. Let me explain that another way. Right. Just by you saying that you're confused. But like, I still don't have that skill down pat, but it's something that I've been able to improve based on therapy.
That's great. Maybe I should
Yeah.
go to therapy. I think that's a plan. I just have to completely work up the courage to go. Because, of course, like I'm a Latina. It's taboo, but I'm working towards that.
Yeah. I get that.
Then you've worked in tech, right? Up until recently, because you decided to become an entrepreneur and a business owner. Now you have Plural. But we talked about this, and even though you have had maybe not so pleasant experiences working in tech, it's still an area or an industry that you would recommend to people. So, like, what are some of the tips and tricks that you could share with somebody to get into tech, and maybe also why is it an area that you recommend?
I recommend it because not everyone is built for entrepreneurship. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I mean, we could have a whole episode talking about entrepreneurship. It's not for everybody. I don't think most people want to be entrepreneurs. I think it provides I think it's glorified right now from the sense of like, the flexibility and all these things, but there's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of uncertainty, depression, anxiety that I experience on a day-to-day basis. And I've only been doing it for like a month or two. You know what I mean? Like, I'll report back in a year. Maybe we'll do a part 2 of an episode. but it's not easy. Honestly, I think it's easier to work at a company. It is predictable. There's a lot of high-paying jobs out there, et cetera, whatever. But I think that many people are working and they're being underpaid just by the industry that they're working in, right? Working in tech gives you a lot more opportunities to increase your finances, right? Like, so many companies even give you a signing bonus. Yeah. My signing bonus when I started working at TikTok was more than my mom made in an entire year. Like, I just got a $30,000 signing bonus. And that was I think that was like mid-range. I'm sure people get like a $50,000 to $60,000 signing bonus just to start, right? The average wage is a lot higher. I also got RSUs, which are essentially stock grants, which are typically not given in other industries. There are other accommodations when it comes to medical benefits. I mean, free breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There's so many benefits to working in tech compared to other industries, on top of the fact that it's a little bit of a safer environment for you to bring your authentic self compared to other industries. So I think those are all the benefits. As far as how to get into it, I think you really just need to look at a job description. It sounds really simple, but I'll explain, right? Go think of a company that you want to work for, go to their website, find a job that you want to apply to, and use the job description as a guide on what you need to do. It's very simple. Like, they literally have outlined what they want out of the people they want to hire. So if they say that they want to hire somebody that does a backflip on command, you better be able to write on your resume and show how well you can do a backflip on command, show the awards you've gotten, quantify how quickly you can do it, all these things, right? But like, if they're looking for Excel experience, like, make sure you have that on your resume. Like, use that. Your resume should reflect the job that you're applying for.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm thinking about how quick I can do a backflip.
No.
No, but I think it's great. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, it's a way to increase your earning potential and to build the generational wealth that we haven't been able to build as a community. And I think, even if it's just to learn some skills before you go into entrepreneurship, it's probably a good place to do both. Learn and get paid.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not saying to not go straight into entrepreneurship, but I think also some other benefits is that, again, I don't want to get my MBA, but working at Facebook for 4 years, that was my MBA. Like, the amount of skills, knowledge around business, around marketing, around driving revenue, products, that has helped me build my own business now. And I'm not saying it's a huge success where I'm generating millions of dollars, but it's gotten me the knowledge that I've needed to create, build, and scale what I have created so far. So yeah, there's a ton to learn from these huge companies. that you can then apply to either your community or your own business as well. And if you get into one of these companies early, you may be able to get stock in that company. And eventually, if and when they go public, that can create generational wealth depending on how early and what your position is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's great for people to know, right? And it's like they can make their own decisions, but it's important to have information to be able to make those decisions. And so I think these conversations are important to do that.
Agreed. Also, you could do both. I did both for a long time. There's no like right or wrong path. Right now, I'm trying entrepreneurship. That doesn't mean I won't go back to corporate eventually. Who knows? I don't know. But for right now, I just want to focus on some of the work that I'm really, really passionate about.
Yeah. And so to close the interview, imagine that a friend of yours is coming to New York City and they want you to show them around. It's their first time, but you're not going to be around. Unfortunately, you can show them. So what are your top 3 places to go or things to do in New York City that you would recommend them to do?
Yes, great question. So many things to do in the city. I would say 3 things I would say is visit a different borough. So if you are coming to this city, stay somewhere that is Manhattan just to experience it. And if you are going to go to Manhattan, just stay in a different part of the city that isn't downtown. I would say that's what I love to do whenever I visit a new city. That's one. I would say there's a huge art scene in the city. So there's a ton of museums that you can go to. I love the Brooklyn Museum, for example. They always have a lot of dope exhibits. And if you want the nightlife, there's so many places to go. One of my favorites is this spot called Gonzalez y Gonzalez. They have live salsa band on Fridays and Saturdays. It's a poppin' spot.
Oh, wow. I wish I knew that when we were living in White Plains. We never went out dancing.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
Well, Pabel, thank you so much for being in the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinX Can. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and remember, unidos somos más.